Hey adapters, welcome back. Today my guest is Elizabeth Muller, the co-founder and CEO of Deep Isolation, a company that's offering the nuclear waste industry an innovative, safe, and permanent solution for nuclear waste disposal. Liz was named a Clean Energy Rising Star in 2020 by Business Insider, which also named Deep Isolation a top 30 clean tech industry startup. Liz will explain why there's a critical need for innovation in nuclear waste disposal. We'll cover topics like social responsibility and how solving the nuclear waste issue can play a role in helping to address climate change. Hi, Liz. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Doug. I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's talk about nuclear waste and nuclear waste disposal. But first off, what is Deep Isolation? We're going to kind of dig into that, but just briefly, what is this company, Deep Isolation?
So Deep Isolation is a company that is bringing nuclear waste disposal and innovation in nuclear waste disposal to address the nuclear waste problem. No country anywhere in the world has ever successfully disposed of high-level nuclear waste or spent nuclear fuel, and we're trying to address that problem.
Okay, so let's talk maybe more in the context of nuclear waste. What is like the status of dealing with nuclear waste at the moment? It always seems to be this low simmering thing, but what's going on out there?
So nuclear waste is currently in temporary storage. So over the past 60 years, as countries have moved forward, both with nuclear power, with reactors, but also with research programs and even weapons, there's been a buildup of nuclear waste inventories. And for a while, they said, okay, well, we'll figure it out later. We're not going to worry about it too much right now. But in the 80s, there was a bit more of a push to try and figure out what countries were going to do with this waste. And since then, it's been more of an active problem with people actually trying to figure out where the waste is going to go. But as I mentioned earlier, no country has actually disposed of the waste. So there are a couple of countries that are making good progress towards eventually disposing of the waste. But most locations and most countries really aren't. And we can go into the reasons for that. But it's been an industry where not a lot has changed over the past 60 years. The waste is in temporary storage, either in pools or in surface storage in many different locations around the world.
Okay, let's go into that a little bit though. Why is this issue of nuclear waste so intractable? We keep hearing about it, and there's Yucca Mountain that seems like the United States that they talk about, and it hasn't been in the news lately, but why is it this intractable problem?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, it's a really complicated problem. Nuclear waste is dangerous potentially for millions of years. So, it's hard enough for us as humans to imagine what the future is going to look like in 10 years. But starting to think about timeframes like millions of years is really, really challenging. It also involves a lot of different actors and different stakeholders. There's communities that are located near where the waste is now or where people are talking about eventually putting it. There's also transportation issues. And if you're going to transport the waste across public roads, then there's concerns potentially about that, or on railways. So it's a really complicated issue to begin with. And then second of all, our governments, which are fundamentally responsible for dealing with this waste, are not really the best when it comes to issues like community involvement and stakeholder engagement and working with environmental groups. So you have this really complex problem, and you have these actors that may not have a lot of trust. The public may not believe them or believe that they have the right approach to moving forward. And that has created this situation where no solution has really moved forward.
Okay, so how does one get involved with the nuclear waste disposal? I mean, what's the origins of Deep Isolation? How do you get into this space?
Yeah, I would have expected that I would end up running a nuclear waste disposal company. That was not a plan for myself. But I am an environmentalist, and I believe that we need to protect our environment, and we need to do things that will help our society as we're moving forward. I'm concerned about global warming. That's been a big focus of my efforts for the past 10 years now. And I do believe that moving forward, we need nuclear power. I think it has to be part of the solution. I also am a fan of renewables, batteries, energy storage, energy efficiency, sort of all of the above. But nuclear power is being held back by the lack of a waste solution. And I think that's understandable. There are questions around, can nuclear really be considered clean when we haven't figured out what to do with the waste? And so I got into this issue because I believe, first of all, that it's the responsible thing to do. Whether or not there's a future for nuclear power, we need to dispose of waste that we have built up over the past 60 years. But then I also do believe that I want there to be a future for nuclear power, and solving the nuclear waste problem can help with that and can help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, can you tell us a bit about the team that you've recruited there at Deep Isolation? What does it mean to be a nuclear waste company? What are the type of people you bring in?
So I started with my father. So I recruited him actually initially for our nonprofit for Berkeley Earth. He was a professor of physics from UC Berkeley. He's been in lots of different scientific areas, everything from particle physics to geophysics to global warming, and so. We created our nonprofit Berkeley Earth together, and then we also co-founded Deep Isolation together. He's the scientific genius inventor behind the innovations that Deep Isolation is bringing to nuclear waste disposal. So he and I have been at it from really day one for Deep Isolation. The second person we recruited was Sam Brinton, who is on the government affairs side. So we also knew early on that this is not just a technical issue. This is an issue where we're going to need to work with governments. Governments are going to be our main customers around the world. And we recognize that in really the earliest days of the company. Another really important hire was our chief operating officer, Rod Baltzer. So Rod had been running a low-level nuclear waste company out of Texas for the past 20 years. And so bringing him in added that sort of nuclear side to our company.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the technology. And so it's fundamentally about these boreholes that you're creating, and that's where the waste is going to go. Can you elaborate? What does it mean to, I guess, you're digging a borehole?
Yeah, so the international scientific consensus is that nuclear waste needs to go into what's called deep geologic isolation. Now, it needs to go deep underground because over periods of millions of years, we don't know what the surface is going to look like. We with earthquakes, with climate change, with floods, with who knows what. And yet, when you go really deep underground, things don't change. Things don't change over periods of millions of years. And so everyone agrees that that is where nuclear waste needs to go. Now, the challenge has been getting it there. And up until recently, the only way that people thought you could put nuclear waste into deep geologic isolation was to mine out big tunnels and to have people underground bringing down the nuclear waste, first to excavate the mine and then to eventually put in and dispose of the waste. And that's really expensive. And it's also, I think it's safe, but there are some safety concerns, both around the people who you have underground. You have to have air so they can breathe. You have to have ventilation. And it's just a number of complications that makes it really expensive. And we're talking about tens of billions to hundreds of billions of dollars for a mined repository. That's what this is called. And that means that smaller countries with smaller inventories can't afford this. It also means that even for big countries like the US, we can really only do one. And that means you have to transport it from all over the country to a single location, and you have to convince that location and the state that they want to be a nuclear waste dump for the rest of the country. And that's really hard to do. So this is, I think, one of the reasons that it hasn't moved forward. It's really expensive. It's hard to do. It's unpopular. And all of this is just really led to the inability for most countries to move forward, with the exceptions of the Feeds and the Swedes, who are really making progress for their mine repositories.
Okay, so if you want to bury in these boreholes, the geology obviously plays a major part, But there's these nuclear power plants. Are they built-in sites to do it? Are they going to be a particular type of customer that you're going to actually drill on those properties? Because I think part of what you're offering is we don't want to move these things around. So how does that work?
Yeah, so what we can bring is more flexibility. So our solution can be modular. So you don't need to pick one location and have that be the disposal facility for the whole country. You can actually just dispose of the waste that is in a particular location, either at or near that location. Now, if people do want to move it, we can also move it to an appropriate location. So it gives you more flexibility. You're not stuck with having to move it to a particular location. You can do it potentially at the reactor or near the reactor, or if there is openness to moving it, we can do that. We do need to look at the geology of the specific site, so that is something that we would do. But again, because you're not having people underground, you're drilling a hole, and we're using directional drilling to do this. So we're looking at holes that are potentially 15, 18 inches in diameter. That means that you can go deeper than you can when you're putting people underground. You don't have to worry about heat because you have so much pressure that you're not reaching the boiling temperature of water. And so if you were at a location where you needed to go deeper because the rock is more permeable and things could potentially get out through the rock, we can go deeper. So there's much more flexibility in terms of where a repository can go when you're not putting people underground and you're using a borehole approach.
So is that one of the toughest things that I guess you have to do, though, is you're explaining that, because that makes sense to me now is, you can go deeper and everything about the dynamics of digging a cave. The borehole just opens up possibilities. Do you have a map that says, all right, these are geological areas spread throughout the United States? Like, these would be good areas for these boreholes. Do you get to that level?
Yeah, I mean, we've thought about different rock types. So initially, as a company, we were thinking about shale. We know a lot about the properties of shale, and we think that shale would be a really excellent disposal rock formation. But more recently, we've been asked about other types of rock formations for locations that may not have shale. And we've been asked about granite and about basement rock and various other types of rock. The key thing isn't so much the rock type, it's the isolation. So we would want to test a particular formation at a particular depth to see if it's been isolated from the biosphere, from the surface for 1 million years. And if it has, then that looks like it could be a potential candidate for disposal at that location. If it hasn't, we may need to move elsewhere, or we may need to go deeper. So again, it's not so much the rock formation type that we're looking for, it's the characteristic of isolation at depth.
Are you having conversations? Because right now, I don't think a nuclear power plant has been built in a while, but if we shift to using nuclear energy in a bigger way in the years ahead, especially in response to climate change, do you think they would partner with you? It's like, okay, we want boreholes to be part of where we're locating these energy plants. Are you having those kind of conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that there is an increased recognition that if we are going to move forward with the future of nuclear power, we need to think about disposal before the nuclear power plant is built. And that's right. And that's the way it should be. And so the fact that we're having conversations with advanced reactor companies, with really, quite a few different types of programs to bring nuclear power to places where they don't currently have nuclear power, most of them are thinking about the waste, up front from the beginning. And so we are looking at, can we site a waste disposal facility together with siting a new reactor?
Liz, I'm just going to see if I can get you to center yourself just a little bit. Do you see you've kind of shifted to the, to your right a little bit? Yeah. Okay. That's there. Yeah. Much better. Okay, I'm sorry.
I can't actually tell by the screen, but I can tell.
We're seeing just on, we can get rid of this later. I just wanted to make sure you're centered. And you lean forward a bit too, and I think that uncenters you a little bit. Okay, so community partnerships are part of what you're doing here too. It's just you have to get the community on board with what you're doing. How does that work with deep isolation?
Yeah, so community partnerships are absolutely crucial, and it's been one of the hardest hardest parts of siting nuclear waste disposal. I think especially when you're going into a community that doesn't currently have nuclear waste, that doesn't necessarily understand nuclear waste, and you're trying to convince them that it's safe to build a nuclear waste repository in their community, that's a really hard thing to do. What we're hoping to do instead is work with existing nuclear communities. So communities that have nuclear waste in their community right now, potentially above ground or in temporary storage, and are waiting for a disposal solution, waiting for it to get out of their community. And what we can do is we can provide them with a new option. So if they still want to wait for a centralized disposal facility and take it out of their community, that is still an option. We're not having any impact on that, if that's what people want to do. But we are finding that in some locations, there is some frustration that hasn't happened yet. And people don't necessarily know how long they're going to have to wait in order to get it out of their community. And so we can provide them with an option of disposing it. So taking the waste that is in their community right now, getting it off the surface, getting it out of the biosphere, and putting it into a location where it will be safe for millions of years. And that's an easier conversation to have. Would you like us to help you take it off the surface and put it somewhere safer, instead of, can we bring it into your community and we'll convince you that it's safe?
Okay, we have a question from the chat room here, a technical question from Ken. How deep are these mine repositories, and does nuclear waste structurally change under pressure?
So the depth varies somewhat, but we're talking about a couple hundred meters, typically, maybe up to 1,000, depending on the situation. Deep isolation, we could do it that shallow, but we can also go potentially significantly deeper. So in our models, we've done 1 and 1.5 kilometers for our safety cases that we've developed. So there was a second question.
Well, and does the nuclear waste structurally change under pressure?
No. So the waste is actually in these really compact pellets. So the waste won't change under pressure. What you do have to think about is the canister that you're putting them in. So we would keep the fuel assemblies in the fuel rods and probably put the whole fuel assembly into a canister that we would then use to lower the fuel and dispose of it. In contrast, in some examples where you have just a vertical borehole, you do have to worry about the crushing. Nuclear waste, because it's so dense, stacking it on top of itself can be problematic if you eventually wanted to go in and retrieve it. But when you're using a horizontal borehole, then that's not as much of an issue.
Interesting. So all these climate negotiations going on right now, nuclear energy, it's part of those discussions, but do you find that they're talking about what you're doing as part of those, COP26 and any of these bigger climate negotiations, like, well, we need people to really focus on the nuclear waste issue? Are you hearing that at these international levels?
So we are increasingly hearing people talk about the importance of nuclear power as part of the solution. So not everybody agrees with that. I think you're still getting some people who believe that we can move forward with just wind and solar. But I do think that most people now appreciate that we need everything we can get if we're really going to solve a big problem like climate change. So I think nuclear is increasingly part of the conversation. So that's good. I think it's one step removed to say that people necessarily are focusing on nuclear waste as part of that. But I do think that everybody who is deeply involved in the nuclear industry recognizes the importance of solving the nuclear waste problem. So clean tech investors or ESG investors may not necessarily think, oh, we should invest in nuclear waste disposal because that will help with climate change. But it's more of a two-step process. But people who are deeply involved and who understand the importance of solving the nuclear waste problem for the future of the nuclear industry clearly see that a company like Deep Isolation is very much in the clean tech, green tech, ESG space of doing something that will help the world and will also help mitigate global warming.
Okay, so Deep Isolation recently closed on a Series A round. What might encourage more investors to invest in nuclear waste as a green technology?
Yeah, so we closed our A round last year. That was a big achievement for us. It was led by NAC International, so a company in the nuclear industry. They do nuclear waste handling, storage. And so I think that was an important marker for us because it shows that the nuclear industry is increasingly behind us and really recognizes the importance of nuclear waste disposal, not just nuclear waste storage. I think that in terms of other investment, I think that we are increasingly seeing the nuclear waste industry and also the drilling industry, which to be honest is another big part of our business. We will have to drill holes in order to dispose of the nuclear waste. And that's an attractive opportunity for oil and gas companies who want to get into clean tech.
Okay, so you guys are obviously, there's a lot of education in what you're doing. We're having this conversation here, but you guys have your own podcast where you talk about these issues?
Yeah, it's called Nuclear Waste, the Whole Story.
The whole story. All right, great, for the boreholes. Excellent. And people can obviously find that anywhere they find a podcast. So who is your target market at the moment? You've got the CDA funding, but you've talked a bit about these different folks, but are this people reaching out to you, you reach out to them and sort of explain that this can be a resource for you?
Are you talking about investors or
I guess even clients, business, your business, you have investors, but then you have actually people that are going to do business with you.
Yeah, so our main customers are going to be governments and in some cases utilities. So we have had active conversations. We have our first handful of customers now. So they're a mix of people reaching out to us. They heard about us. They know that we're in the nuclear waste disposal business and they need a solution. So there is some demand there for progress, as well as us reaching out and saying, we know you have to dispose of nuclear waste. We think we can help, and here's how.
Okay, so as we wrap this up, what's next for you? What's on the immediate horizon of what Deep Isolation is going to be doing?
So we're looking to do more demonstration programs at specific sites over the next few years. We did do a demonstration in 2019 that was it was pretty significant in the nuclear industry. We were the first company to do a successful demonstration of nuclear waste disposal in the United States. Other efforts had been shut down by public protests, so that was a big milestone. But now we're working with specific customers about specific inventories of nuclear waste at specific locations, and we are bringing that forward. So I think over the next few years, we will see demonstrations. We will see us going through the licensing process, which is a lot of work. I mean, we really have to show that this is safe and that it's environmentally friendly. And we'll be doing that over the next few years as we work towards our first actual nuclear waste disposal, which I think will begin in, 4 to 5, 6 years, probably.
Are you going to be there at that moment where, for I guess, drilling the borehole? I mean,
oh my goodness, I would not miss it for anything.
Oh, that would make a great video. Well, Liz, this has been fascinating. You guys are doing some really interesting work. I appreciate you coming on Simpatico. I'm going to take you into just chatting, but if people want to learn more on the page for this episode, we'll have links to your website and everything. But thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. This was great.
All right, we'll be right back in a sec. Hey, Liz, we just close out the episode, bookend it. Great, time flies. Yeah, that went well. Some of the questions I didn't get to is, what is the status of Yucca Mountain right now? I mean, we talked at the beginning, but is it officially dead?
Yucca Mountain is so complicated. So Yucca Mountain is the law. So nuclear waste in the United States is required by law to go to Yucca Mountain, and no other disposal solution can be considered until Yucca Mountain is operational. Now, Yucca Mountain isn't moving forward. It hasn't been funded. It's been, there's not even any progress being made towards eventually completing Yucca Mountain. So we're in this really difficult situation where basically no progress is happening or can happen in the United States until that law eventually gets changed.
There was a comment here from Ken earlier on. Most parents only help their kids learn to clean the rooms. You and your dad are next level. So thanks, Ken. That's certainly cleaning up a big mess, right? Well, what I always thought was interesting about the Yucca Mountain situation, and legally, like you just said, it's required by law. You have, I mean, for you to do what you're doing, that law has to sort of, did you ignore it, or something, new legislation has to pass to say, okay, we can put it somewhere else?
Yeah, so our first customers are not going to be in the United States.
Okay,
The
okay.
United States is a really, I think that once we've demoed this out, once we've disposed of nuclear waste somewhere else in the world, I think it'll get easier to change that law. I would love it if the United States prioritized changing this requirement right now, and we're more open to innovation in nuclear waste disposal. That would be fantastic. But my expectation is that we're going to have to solve it somewhere else first.
Right. And when I guess I was following this much more closely, I think in the 90s, and it just, if it all goes to Yucca Mountain, you turn all these nuclear power plants, like you move it from these isolated areas, and if it's constantly in motion, you've now turned nuclear waste it's a traveling roadshow. It's constantly everywhere, right? And so Yucca Mountain is not really some permanent site. So I just did, yeah, there seemed quite a bit of flaws to that approach, because they'll just keep bringing it. Oh, the train's moving it. So it's there for, the waste is there in Kansas. So anyway, it's interesting that your industry has popped up. Obviously, if we go full on with nuclear energy, there's going to be a huge demand for it. Well, Liz, I don't want to keep you on any longer. I don't have to see any more questions, but this has been great.
Okay.
We will be in touch, and the episode there should be quick turnaround on having it available for you guys. But thank you so much for partnering with Simpatico. This has been great. Hopefully we'll have maybe some future episodes talking about some additional issues. We'll just be in touch on that.
Sounds great. Thank you, Doug.
Great. And you can just sign out of StreamYard.
All right.
Have a great day.
You too.
Hi, folks. Thanks to Liz Muller, and thanks to Deep Isolation. I hope you learned a lot. I had no clue that there was such an industry going where you're burying it in such a way. And if we go nuclear energy in a big way, there's going to be just a huge demand to get rid of all this waste. And so, fascinating technology. All right, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you all have a great day, and thanks for joining us here on Simpatico.